It began as a calm spring morning in Pleasant Grove, Utah. Michelle McNeil, wife, mother, and a beloved member of her community, had just returned home after her daughter's preschool drop-off with her husband, Martin. By all appearances, theirs was the portrait of stability: a handsome, successful doctor, a devoted wife, and a bustling household of children. But beneath the manicured lawns and the carefully maintained image of a happy Mormon family, fractures had been widening for years. Michelle Summers, a life of faith and promise. Michelle Summers was born on January 15, 1957, in Concord, California. Raised in a devout Mormon household, her childhood was steeped in faith, structure, and community. Michelle thrived in that environment. She was a bright, gifted child who excelled in nearly everything she touched. At school, she was a top student and admired for her talent with the violin. Her charisma drew admiration from peers and teachers alike. Cheerleading, beauty pageants, academic accolades, Michelle balanced them all with a grace that seemed effortless. In 1976, at just 19 years old, she won the title of Miss Concord. It was a testament to her natural elegance, beauty, and confidence. Yet Michelle's true grounding came not from her looks or accomplishments, but from her faith. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints shaped her worldview, teaching her the values of loyalty, selflessness, and family above all. She dreamed of a big family, of marriage, and of raising children in a home rooted in love and devotion. Meeting Martin McNeil at a church singles event, Michelle's life changed forever. She met a man who seemed to embody everything she wanted in a partner: articulate, well-dressed, and self-assured. His name was Martin McNeil. Martin carried himself with a quiet intensity, a confidence that drew people in. He had an almost magnetic presence, particularly among women. To Michelle, he seemed ambitious, intelligent, and capable of providing the kind of life she envisioned. Within just a month, the two were married. To outsiders, it looked like a whirlwind romance born from faith and shared values. To Michelle, it felt like destiny. Building a family in the early years of marriage, Michelle embraced motherhood with joy. Within 5 years, she and Martin had welcomed 4 children: Rachel, Vanessa, Alexis, and Damien. Michelle was a hands-on mother, pouring herself into every detail of family life. She ensured her children were polite, well-dressed, and deeply connected to their faith. Friends and neighbors described her as graceful and nurturing, a woman who seemed to make the impossible look effortless. Meanwhile, Martin pursued an ambitious academic and professional path. He earned both medical and law degrees, eventually practicing as a psychiatrist. The couple appeared unstoppable, she the devoted homemaker, he the successful doctor. But behind Martin's polished exterior was something darker. The cracks in Martin's image. Martin McNeil's professional achievements did not reflect stability at home. Over the years, troubling patterns emerged. In 1994, his career was shaken when it was discovered he had engaged in an inappropriate relationship with a female patient. The scandal sent him into a spiral, culminating in threats to take his own life. Similar crises followed in 2000 and again in 2005, when Michelle caught him consuming explicit material online. Each time, his response was volatile, filled with threats and emotional manipulation. For a man trained to heal minds, Martin's own mental state was deeply unstable. And yet, Michelle stayed. Her faith, her loyalty, and her belief in the sanctity of family bound her to him. Expanding the household as years passed, the McNeil's family grew even larger. When their daughter Vanessa struggled with addiction and an unplanned pregnancy, Michelle and Martin stepped in to raise her child, adopting the baby girl and naming her Ada. Later, they adopted 3 daughters from Ukraine: Gazelle, Elle, and Sabrina. With 8 children under one roof, the McNeils appeared the embodiment of the American dream's successful parents, a bustling home, and a legacy of love. But beneath the polished facade, Martin was changing. The midlife shift. By his early 50s, Martin began a startling transformation. He dropped weight rapidly, began working out obsessively, and even took up tanning. He brushed it off as health-conscious living. But Michelle sensed something deeper. His absences from home grew longer. He claimed they were for work, but Michelle doubted him. He seemed increasingly distant, more preoccupied with his appearance than his family. Michelle confided her fears to her daughter Alexis, who was studying medicine. Together, they decided to dig into Martin's behavior. What they discovered would unravel everything Michelle believed about her marriage. The phone records. One late night, Alexis and Michelle combed through Martin's phone records. The same number appeared again and again, often late at night. It belonged to a woman named Gypsy Willis. The name was unfamiliar, but the pattern was undeniable. Michelle confronted Martin. He denied everything. There was no affair, he insisted. He was focused on his health, and if Michelle wanted to keep up, she should consider doing the same. In a manipulative twist, Martin suggested she undergo plastic surgery. He implied that it would boost her confidence, perhaps rekindle their relationship. Michelle had never felt insecure about her appearance. She had always been admired for her beauty and grace. But after years of sacrifice, and with Martin's affection slipping away, the seed was planted, pushed toward surgery. Once Michelle voiced the faintest interest, Martin acted with unsettling urgency. He pushed to schedule the procedure immediately, arguing that spring break was the perfect time. Alexis would be home to help. There was no reason to wait. Michelle hesitated, preferring to delay until summer, but Martin was insistent, almost forceful. He scheduled the appointment himself, selecting the surgeon and dominating the consultation. His demands went beyond a facelift. He insisted on additional procedures: a nose reshaping, an eyelid lift, and a refinement of her chin line. What was supposed to be a minor enhancement became a grueling 9-hour operation under anesthesia. Michelle sat silently in the consultation room as Martin dictated the plan. Her voice, usually so graceful, so composed, was absent. April 3, 2007, Michelle entered the operating room for her procedures. When she awoke, her face was swollen and sore, a normal part of recovery. What was unusual were the extra medications. Martin requested 5 different drugs, including powerful painkillers and sedatives, far beyond what was typically prescribed together. He told the surgeon Michelle had a low pain threshold. He promised to personally oversee her recovery. At the hospital, Michelle noted her elevated blood pressure and remained uneasy. But by the next day, Alexis brought her home. That's when the nightmare began. A mother's warning at home. Martin quickly took control of Michelle's medications. Alexis, concerned, stepped in. She noticed her mother was heavily sedated, barely coherent. When she confronted Martin, he admitted he may have over-medicated her. Michelle whispered to Alexis that Martin had been giving her pills she didn't recognize. Her eyes, still bandaged from surgery, left her vulnerable. She asked Alexis to describe each pill so she could memorize their shapes by touch. Then, in a chilling moment of clarity, Michelle said, "If anything happens to me, make sure it wasn't your father." It was a warning no daughter should ever hear. Spring break ended, and Alexis returned to school. She called her mother the next morning, April 11th, and was relieved to hear her sounding cheerful. Michelle said Martin was being kind, attentive even. Hours later, she would be dead. On the morning of April 11th, 2007, Pleasant Grove, Utah, seemed as ordinary as any other. Blossoms decorated tree branches, the sun filtered softly through curtains, and in the McNeil household, routines ticked along. Martin picked up his youngest daughter Ada from preschool, returned home, and walked through the front door of what looked like a comfortable family house. But within minutes, the ordinary morning fractured into something horrific. The house was strangely quiet. Martin called for Michelle, but she didn't answer. He searched the downstairs rooms, the living room, the kitchen, the office, and found nothing unusual. Upstairs, he claimed it was difficult for him to climb because he had been walking with a cane after foot surgery. So, he turned to his youngest daughter. "Go find Mom," he instructed Ada. It was a decision that would haunt the little girl for the rest of her life. Ada ran upstairs and then screamed. Her voice carried through the walls like a warning bell no one wanted to hear. "Mommy's in the tub," the bathtub. When Martin finally reached the bathroom, he claimed Michelle was slumped over the bathtub, part of her body draped awkwardly outside the water, her head submerged. But Ada's memory was different. She recalled her mother lying fully submerged in the water, face up, floating lifeless. Neighbors would later describe hearing Ada's terrified cries, the kind of sound that carved through the air and stuck to memory. Michelle Summers McNeil, age 50, was discovered unresponsive in the family's master bathroom. The 911 call. Martin dialed 911. His call, however, wasn't what anyone expected from a frantic husband. Instead of calm urgency or desperation, his tone was sharp, aggressive, even hostile. He barked at the dispatcher, shouting his responses rather than explaining the situation. "I need an ambulance," he snapped. The operator pressed for details. Was Michelle breathing? Was she conscious? Could he perform CPR? Martin grew impatient, yelling, cutting off the dispatcher, and then hanging up abruptly before giving the full address. When dispatchers called back, the same pattern repeated. Anger, yelling, another hang up. On the third attempt, he finally gave an address, but it was the wrong one. Whether by accident or deliberate misdirection, the error cost precious minutes. By the time paramedics arrived, over 30 minutes had passed since the first call. Paramedics arrive. When emergency responders entered the home, they found Michelle pulled from the tub, but unresponsive. She was soaked, pale, and without a pulse. Martin insisted he had performed CPR, but paramedics were immediately skeptical. Michelle's lungs were filled with water, evidence that proper resuscitation had never been done. Had Martin really tried to save her, much of that water would have been expelled. Instead of focusing on his wife's condition, Martin seemed distracted, even erratic. Witnesses recalled his demeanor as strange, not grief-stricken or panicked, but volatile, scattered, and oddly performative. While paramedics worked furiously to revive Michelle, Martin shouted nearby. He barked questions no one could answer. Why did she insist on plastic surgery? He scolded his unconscious wife, demanding to know why she had gone through with the procedures. The tone carried no sorrow, only blame. The last call from Michelle for her daughter Alexis. The horror carried an extra weight. Just hours earlier, she had spoken to her mother on the phone. Michelle sounded cheerful, optimistic even, claiming Martin was being kind to her, attentive in her care. Alexis had felt reassured. Maybe her father was finally stepping up. Maybe the crisis had passed. Now, hearing her father's cold announcement, "Your mother's gone," Alexis felt a wave of dread deeper than grief. Michelle's warning echoed in her mind. "If anything happens to me, make sure it wasn't your father." Declared dead at the hospital. Doctors worked for 45 minutes to restart Michelle's heart. Nothing revived her. At 11:43 a.m., Michelle McNeil was pronounced dead. Martin's behavior grew even stranger. He allegedly offered paramedics 10 Zalozen to keep trying, even though resuscitation had already been exhausted. To outsiders, it might have looked like desperate grief. To those watching closely, it looked like a performance. The initial autopsy provided an answer that sounded simple, even routine natural causes. Michelle's death was classified as the result of cardiovascular disease, high blood pressure, and myocarditis. On paper, it appeared to be a tragic but natural passing of a woman who had just undergone intensive surgery. But Michelle's daughters, particularly Alexis and Rachel, didn't buy it. The details didn't fit. Their mother had been heavily medicated. She had whispered fears of being drugged. She had been recovering, sounding cheerful just hours before her death. And now, their father's story was riddled with inconsistencies. To them, it wasn't natural. It was murder. The missing pills. When Alexis returned home from school, she immediately began searching for the medications Martin had been giving Michelle. She wanted to count them, record the doses, and determine exactly what her mother had taken. But the medications were gone. Martin claimed not to know where they were. He suggested perhaps the police had taken them, or they had been misplaced. But then, Michelle's son Damien came forward with a disturbing confession. Martin had instructed him to flush the pills down the toilet. Why would a grieving husband order the disposal of medication that could have helped doctors understand what happened? To Michelle's daughters, the answer was obvious. Because those pills held the truth. The rushed funeral. Martin moved quickly to bury the past, literally. Just 3 days after Michelle's death, he arranged her funeral. The speed stunned her family. Even more shocking, Martin went further. He barred Michelle's relatives from attending, threatening to call the police if they showed up. For a man who had just lost his wife, he seemed less interested in honoring her life and more focused on control. Michelle's own family stayed away, unwilling to cause a public scene. They grieved privately, left with the unsettling feeling that something was deeply wrong. The unknown woman at Michelle's funeral. While family members were excluded, one unfamiliar face stood out, a young brunette no one seemed to know. She lingered quietly, drawing little attention, but her presence was memorable. Later, the family would learn her name, Gypsy Willis. Gypsy moves in just weeks after Michelle's death. Martin announced he had found help for the household. With 4 young daughters still at home, he said he needed assistance. Alexis offered to move in, to pause her medical training and care for her siblings. But Martin refused. "I've already found someone," he told her. Her name, Gypsy. Alexis and Rachel froze. The same Gypsy whose number they had found in Martin's phone records. The same Gypsy their mother had feared was his mistress. Within 2 weeks of Michelle's burial, Gypsy moved into the McNeil family home. She didn't act like a nanny. She didn't cook, didn't clean, and rarely interacted with the children. Instead, she focused entirely on Martin, doting on him, attending to him, living as though she were already his wife. For the children, the replacement was as shocking as it was painful. Their mother's memory was still raw, yet here was another woman sleeping in her bed. Alexis confronts Martin. When Alexis confronted her father, demanding to know why Gypsy was in the home, Martin reacted with anger. He banished Alexis, forbidding her from visiting and ordering her siblings not to speak with her again. It was a stunning move, a father cutting off his daughter because she dared question him. But Alexis refused to stay silent. She and her sister Rachel began documenting everything, determined to uncover the truth. The public face to the outside world, Martin tried to maintain an image of normalcy. He attended church, smiled at neighbors, and flaunted his relationship with Gypsy as if it were destiny rather than betrayal. Just 3 months after Michelle's death, he took Gypsy to meet his parents. There, he declared her the love of his life, claiming he had never loved Michelle the way he loved Gypsy. Before leaving, he proposed. To his daughters, it was more than disrespect. It was proof. Proof that Michelle's death wasn't a tragedy, but a stepping stone, carefully planned so Martin could replace his wife with another woman. A family divided, the McNeil household split apart. Alexis and Rachel pushed for answers, but Martin kept a firm grip on the younger children. He cast Alexis as a traitor, convincing her siblings she was no longer part of the family. The once close family was now fractured, the children caught between loyalty to their father and suspicion of the truth. Michelle's whispered warning loomed like a prophecy. If anything happens to me, make sure it wasn't your father. Suspicion turns to action. Alexis and Rachel refused to let their mother's death be erased. They started a blog, a place to share their suspicions and gather information. To their surprise, messages began flooding in, from women who claimed to have had affairs with Martin while he was married to Michelle. The stories painted a picture of a man who was not only unfaithful but manipulative, deceitful, and reckless. The sisters brought the information to police. While it wasn't direct evidence of murder, it was enough to catch the attention of investigators. 2 detectives began digging deeper into Martin's life. What they uncovered was staggering. The fraudulent doctor, despite his polished image, Martin McNeil's past was riddled with deception. He had never finished high school, instead using someone else's diploma to apply to medical school. After marrying Michelle, he was arrested for fraud, opening a bank account in a deceased person's name and writing 36,000 in bad checks. His spending during that period was bizarre: jewelry, furniture, dozens of pairs of socks, and even a full year's supply of chocolate-covered cherries. He was sentenced to 2 years but served only 180 days. Despite this, he managed to become a licensed physician, carrying the title he flaunted so proudly. Even his military service was tainted. He was discharged after claiming he heard voices urging him to kill. Yet, he collected a veteran's pension of $3 a month for decades. To Michelle's daughters, a truth was now undeniable: their father was not the man they thought he was. Gypsy's true role: in 2009, 2 years after Michelle's death, Martin and Gypsy were arrested, not for murder, but for identity theft. Together they had abandoned their adopted daughter Giselle, sending her to Ukraine under the guise of a family visit. In reality, they had stolen her identity, creating a false persona named Gillian McNeil. Using her social security number, Gypsy applied for loans to wipe her debts clean. It was a scheme so cruel it left investigators speechless. Martin was sentenced to 4 years in prison. Gypsy received 2, but prison wasn't the end. It was the beginning, because with Martin behind bars, detectives finally had the opportunity to revisit Michelle's death, and what they uncovered would shatter the illusion of natural causes once and for all. For a time, it seemed as though Martin McNeil had succeeded. His wife Michelle was buried. The autopsy said natural causes. Gypsy had moved into the family home, slipping into Michelle's place with barely a pause. The children, fractured by fear and manipulation, were divided, and Martin, the self-styled doctor, walked around Pleasant Grove as though nothing had happened. But the whispers did not fade. Alexis and Rachel refused to let their mother's voice die, and slowly, the pieces of Martin's carefully constructed farce began to collapse. A family refuses silence. The McNeil daughters knew their father's behavior was anything but normal. the rushed funeral, the missing pills, the mistress moving in less than 2 weeks later. Alexis could not shake her mother's whispered warning. "If anything happens to me, make sure it wasn't your father." She and Rachel documented everything, from Martin's erratic behavior to Gypsy's sudden presence in the home. They spoke out publicly, starting a blog where they shared their suspicions, and soon others began reaching out. Women came forward with stories of affairs with Martin. He had presented himself as charming, intelligent, and powerful, luring them into secret relationships while maintaining his polished image as a family man and doctor. To Michelle's daughters, it was confirmation of what they already knew. Their father had been living a double life, one built on lies and manipulation. But infidelity wasn't murder. They needed more. The identity theft scheme. The breakthrough came not through Michelle's case, but through Martin and Gypsy's greed. In 2009, 2 years after Michelle's death, investigators uncovered a shocking scheme. Martin and Gypsy had abandoned their adopted daughter Giselle, sending her to Ukraine under the guise of a family visit. In reality, they were stealing her identity. They used her social security number to create a fake person's, Gillian McNeil, a fabricated daughter who didn't exist. Under this identity, Gypsy applied for loans to wipe away her debt and start fresh. The fraud was blatant. Investigators swooped in. Martin was arrested at the airport, Gypsy at the home they shared. Both were convicted of identity theft. Martin was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison. Gypsy received 2. At last, the perfect doctor's mask cracked, and with Martin behind bars, investigators turned back to Michelle. The re-examined autopsy detectives reopened the case, this time with fresh eyes and suspicions. They re-examined Michelle's autopsy and ordered new toxicology tests. What they found was damning. In her system were 4 to 5 prescription medications, a cocktail of drugs Michelle would never have taken on her own. Potent sedatives, painkillers, and sleeping aids, all given in doses that would have left her vulnerable, weak, and incapable of saving herself. And the timeline was crucial. The drugs had been administered within an hour of her death. Hours earlier, Alexis had left the home, carefully managing her mother's medications. Michelle had been alert, sounding well on the phone. She wasn't supposed to take anything more. Blindfolded from her surgery, Michelle could not have identified the pills herself. Investigators suspected Martin had slipped the medications into her food or drinks. To Alexis and Rachel, it was exactly what their mother had feared. Conflicting stories, other inconsistencies added weight to the suspicions. Ada, the youngest daughter, told investigators she had found her mother lying flat in the tub, fully submerged. Martin, however, claimed he had found Michelle slumped over, her legs hanging outside the tub. The stories didn't match. Martin also insisted he had performed CPR, but paramedics found large amounts of water still in Michelle's lungs, proof that no proper resuscitation had been attempted. Even the neighbor who rushed over after hearing Ada's screams contradicted Martin's account, stating that Michelle was face up in the tub when she arrived, not slumped as Martin had described. Piece by piece, the narrative unraveled. The will. Then investigators uncovered something even more chilling. Martin had changed his will after Michelle's death. Each of his children would inherit just $1. The remainder of his estate, all of it was to go to Gypsy Willis. Even in death, Michelle had been erased from Martin's plans, and his children had been stripped of everything, cast aside in favor of the woman who had stepped into Michelle's place almost immediately after the funeral. To prosecutors, it painted a clear motive. Martin wanted Michelle out of the way. The arrest in 2012, just 2 months after his release from prison on the identity theft charges. Martin McNeil was arrested again, this time for murder. The community was stunned. For years, rumors had circulated, but many had assumed Michelle's death was a tragic medical complication. Now the facade had crumbled. The respected doctor, the family man, was accused of killing his own wife. The trial that followed would expose the depths of Martin's deception and the devastating consequences of Michelle's misplaced trust. The trial in October 2013, the murder trial of Martin McNeil began. Courtrooms filled with reporters, family members, and spectators eager to see the truth laid bare. Prosecutors argued that Martin had deliberately drugged Michelle, combining multiple medications to weaken and incapacitate her. They claimed he then placed her in the bathtub, ensuring she drowned before help could arrive. His motive was clear. He wanted to be free of Michelle and pursue his relationship with Gypsy. The defense insisted Michelle's death was a tragic accident, the result of natural heart problems compounded by surgery. They argued there was no direct evidence Martin had given her the drugs. But the prosecution's witnesses painted a damning picture. The witnesses, Alexis McNeil, Michelle's daughter, took the stand. She spoke of her mother's whispered warning, the mysterious pills, and her father's insistence on managing the medication. Her testimony was emotional, powerful, and unforgettable. Rachel, her sister, supported the story, describing her father's strange behavior and his hostility toward anyone who questioned him. Then came other shocking testimonies. Anna, Martin's former mistress, testified that Martin had once admitted to killing multiple people, including his own brother Roy. He told her that Roy had attempted suicide and that he had helped him along by pushing his head under the water. Martin had even offered to kill Anna's husband for her. Another woman testified that Martin had suggested a suicide pact to his daughter Vanessa.